For centuries, the earliest chapters of our species have been pinned to the soil beneath our feet. Africa's deep strata, the river valleys of the Near East, the shifting corridors where early Homo sapiens left bones, tools, pigments, and fire pits behind. Fossil records trace a body, stone blades trace a hand, cave paintings trace a mind awakening to itself. Yet even within this familiar narrative, there are fractures, strange accelerations of knowledge, unexplained leaps in cognition, and cultural motifs appearing simultaneously across continents long before contact was possible. Archaeologists still struggle to explain why anatomically modern humans existed for nearly 200,000 years before complex civilization emerged almost overnight. Geneticists still debate why our sudden neurological expansion remains unmatched by any parallel species. And ancient texts, from Sumer to the Indus Valley to the earliest layers of Egyptian myth, describe origins that do not begin on Earth, but somewhere else, as though humanity awakened from a forgotten journey. When timelines fray and evidence contradicts expectation, a quiet question drifts in. What if the story we inherited begins long after the first chapter was lost? What if the fragments buried in ice cores, the anomalous tools found in strata too old for human hands, or the myths that speak of descendings rather than emergings, are not metaphors, but imprints of something unspoken? Could there have been a migration older than any terrestrial map, a rupture in memory that severed us from a beginning far beyond the horizon? And if so, who or what chose what we were allowed to remember? Welcome to Cryptic Realm Channel. Settle in, breathe slowly, and let the night open its quiet corridors around you. As we drift into the first steps of this long and fragile inquiry, one question lingers in the dark. If human history did not begin on Earth, then what traces still remain, waiting for us to notice? A faint tension settles when we return to the landscapes where humanity is believed to have first appeared. Open savannas, shifting grasslands, volcanic basins shaped by tectonic restlessness. These regions hold fossils and hearths, yet something about them feels incomplete, as though they preserve the aftermath rather than the beginning. Even paleoanthropologists occasionally admit, in restrained academic tones, that the missing links are not singular gaps, but entire corridors of absence. The abrupt refinement of tools at sites like Olorgesailie in Kenya, where obsidian sourced from distant quarries appears without evidence of intermediate trade networks, whispers of an intelligence that did not gradually evolve, but arrived already knowing. And the sudden spread of symbolic thinking, engraved ochre slabs from Blombos Cave, geometric markings far older than agriculture, suggests that a mind fully formed stepped into a world still half asleep. Against this quiet unease stand the myths that refuse to align with the accepted script. In the earliest Sumerian tablets, humanity is described not as rising from the soil, but as being shaped after those who descended, a phrase scholars often call metaphorical but cannot fully contextualize. In the Dogon traditions of West Africa, star lore too precise for naked eye observation appears in stories predating modern telescopes. Even the earliest Egyptian cosmologies describe an arrival from the islands of the imperishable, not located on any earthly map. None of these narratives prove anything on their own, yet their convergence forms a subtle pressure, an outline of something larger than their individual pieces. Perhaps the landscapes we now study were never meant to be our point of origin, but only the place where memory restarted after an event we no longer comprehend. If so, what force, natural or intentional, could render an entire beginning silent? And why do the earliest voices of humanity echo with fragments that sound as though they survived a journey rather than witnessed a birth? The silence surrounding humanity's earliest awakening grows heavier when we look beyond fossils and stone tools into the deeper record carved by the earth itself. Ice cores drilled from Greenland's ancient layers show abrupt climatic upheavals, shifts so severe they nearly erased entire ecosystems. These disruptions occurred long before agriculture, long before cities, yet coincided strangely with the first signs of symbolic cognition. It is as though the world was resetting, and within that reset, a new kind of being emerged with knowledge disproportionate to its archaeological footprint. Geological strata rarely lie, yet they do not interpret. They only hold traces of something momentous, leaving us to wonder whether environmental catastrophe alone could produce such cognitive acceleration, or whether catastrophe merely cleared a stage for minds already shaped elsewhere. There are other peculiarities buried in the soil. At sites like Jebel Irhoud in Morocco, skulls identified as early Homo sapiens appear tens of thousands of years earlier than expected, yet their cranial morphology hints at a brain already reorganizing itself toward abstraction. These findings complicate linear evolution and challenge the assumption that intelligence develops in predictable gradients. Even more puzzling is the sudden dispersal of humans across vast territories without the evolutionary intermediates once expected to accompany such movement. Some researchers quietly propose that genetic bottlenecks, points where the human population sharply dwindled, may conceal earlier migrations or encounters that left traces too faint for conventional models to register. Cultural evidence adds its own soft insistence. The oldest myths do not portray humanity as inexperienced or primitive. Instead, they speak of a time when knowledge was introduced rather than discovered, bestowed rather than slowly assembled. In the Rigveda of ancient India, hymns describe luminous beings imparting order to early humans. In the pre-Columbian narratives of Mesoamerica, gods teach agriculture, astronomy, and writing to people portrayed as newly arrived rather than newly evolved. These texts are often framed as symbolic expressions of natural forces, yet they share a recurring implication. Wisdom appears suddenly, as if carried from a place not fully remembered. Even languages hold echoes of an origin that seems to precede earthbound development. Some linguists note that certain root structures in ancient tongues, Sumerian, Proto-Euphratic, even fragments of lost Anatolian dialects, do not easily fit within Indo-European or Afro-Asiatic families. Their syntactic peculiarities appear isolated, as though they were transplanted rather than organically derived. No definitive conclusion arises from this, yet the impression lingers that these early languages began already matured, not shaped slowly over millennia. What complicates all of this is the pattern of erasure. Wherever traces of anomalous knowledge appear, they are often accompanied by abrupt discontinuities in the archaeological record. Sediment layers that show firestorms with no clear ignition source, cultural layers disappearing with scarcely a trace, or technological regressions where societies forget techniques they once mastered. The collapse of Göbekli Tepe's ceremonial structures, intentionally buried by hands we cannot identify, stands as one such enigma. Why conceal a monument older than metal, older than writing, older than the civilizations that later claimed antiquity? Was it fear, reverence, or an attempt to hide something too dangerous or too revealing about its creators? In contemplating these patterns, doubt grows quietly at the margins. Perhaps humanity did not begin in the cradle we imagine, but arrived in a world already turbulent, carrying remnants of a memory that could not survive the crossing, a memory that later shattered into myth, symbol, and fragment. And if such an arrival occurred, what kind of event could sever our continuity so completely that only scattered residues remain? More unsettling still, what if some force, human or otherwise, worked to ensure that forgetting became our foundation, not our failure? The further one moves into the remnants of the earliest constructed spaces, the more the silence around our beginnings acquires a tangible shape. Architecture, unlike myth, leaves edges that can be measured. Yet even those edges seem to imply hands familiar with principles not expected in societies still struggling against the rawness of nature. At Nabta Playa in the Nubian desert, megalithic stones aligned with solstice markers predate the Egyptian pyramids by millennia. The precision of these alignments, tracking stellar movements with an accuracy difficult for even later agrarian cultures, appears abruptly, without a lineage of simpler structures leading up to them. Archaeologists often classify such sites as ritualistic, a category useful for cataloging but insufficient for explaining why a supposedly primitive community possessed astronomical insight requiring generations of observation and a conceptual grasp of cosmic cycles far beyond immediate survival needs. Comparable anomalies surface across continents. In the Americas, the earliest mound complexes at Poverty Point showed geometric planning that suggests an understanding of spatial harmony and long-distance resource coordination. Stone tools, obsidian shards, and ornamental objects discovered there originate from regions hundreds of kilometers apart. Yet no evidence of a preceding hierarchy or system of administration appears in surrounding layers. Cultures usually grow toward complexity, but here complexity stands at the doorway, as if inherited from an invisible predecessor. One wonders whether such places were attempts to recreate something remembered dimly, a structure that once served a purpose no longer fully understood. The islands of Southeast Asia deepen the puzzle. On Sulawesi, painted hand stencils and depictions of animals date back more than 40,000 years, rivaling the European cave art long considered the apex of early symbolic expression. But what truly unsettles researchers is the stylistic coherence across regions separated by oceans. The contouring of figures, the shading, even the narrative gestures seem drawn from a shared, older vocabulary. Cultural diffusion does not explain this easily, for boat technology capable of linking these islands appears far later in the archaeological record. It raises an uncomfortable possibility. Either early humans possessed maritime capabilities not yet identified, or the symbolic language predates their separation. Perhaps itself an artifact of an earlier memory carried long before their paths diverged. These fragments, architectural, artistic, linguistic, form a mosaic that never resolves cleanly. Still, patterns whisper from the spaces between them. Sudden skill, sudden knowledge, sudden organization. If humanity had been accumulating learning over vast stretches of time, Why do so many cultural expressions seem to begin at heights that should have taken ages to reach? One might expect rough approximations, experimental failures, or incremental improvement. Instead, early traces often appear polished, as though crafted by people already accustomed to complexity. It is here that the old stories take on a different resonance, not as literal testimony, but as encoded grief. Many indigenous traditions describe a departure from a former world, a place of abundance, of clarity, of connection, followed by descent into a harsher, unfamiliar landscape. Aboriginal Australian narratives speak of a time before the dreaming, a state of being disrupted by a transformative event. Ancient Chinese texts reference a falling away from a celestial order. Even early Greek accounts, like those attributed to Hesiod, describe successive ages of humanity, each inferior to the one before, suggesting a regression rather than a progression. These motifs, scattered and unconnected by geography, feel strangely aligned, an echo of something lost. And when civilizations finally arise, Sumer, Egypt, the Indus Valley, they do not begin hesitantly. Their first cities emerge with administrative systems, astronomical frameworks, complex agricultural engineering, and mythic traditions already fully formed. It is as if they awakened not at the dawn of invention, but at the edge of recollection. The Eridu Genesis, one of the oldest Mesopotamian texts, speaks of kingship descending from the heavens, a phrase many interpret as poetic, but whose persistence across centuries hints at deeper cultural memory. Why would the earliest scribes describe civilization as returning rather than emerging, unless they sensed continuity with something preceding them? Still, nothing in the material record confirms an otherworldly origin. The Earth's crust yields no alien artifacts, no technologies beyond known physics. Yet what if the traces we seek would not survive geological time? If the migration, assuming it existed, occurred not with machines but with bodies, minds, and memories? What if the true evidence lies not in metal or stone, but in the inexplicable leaps inscribed into our cognition? And if humanity indeed came from elsewhere, what trauma or necessity drove that crossing, and why were its details allowed to fade into myth? The thought lingers with a delicate unease, for buried beneath it lies another possibility. Perhaps someone ensured the forgetting. If so, what purpose would the erasure serve, and who continues to benefit from a history with no beginning? When the trail of humanity's beginnings slips beyond the reach of written memory, the earth itself becomes the only witness left to interrogate. Yet even its testimony feels strangely conflicted. Layers of sediment that should reveal a steady ascent from simple to complex instead show abrupt intrusions, technological sparks flaring out of landscapes otherwise silent. One of the most puzzling examples emerges from the Black Sea region, where underwater surveys have identified what appear to be rectilinear stone foundations lying far below the modern shoreline. Marine geologists attribute the submersion to post-glacial flooding around 7,600 BCE, but the structures themselves imply an architectural competence that predates any known city. If they are indeed human-made, they belong to a world washed away before history began, a world that seems to have mastered large-scale construction long before the textbook timeline permits. The water muffles their origins, as though the sea itself serves as a veil drawn over a chapter that was never meant to be reopened. Elsewhere, in the caves of northern Spain, The ochre markings once attributed to early Homo sapiens have been re-examined and tentatively dated to a period when Neanderthals dominated the region. These pigments, applied with deliberation and symbolic intent, complicate the assumption that symbolic thought blossomed exclusively in our species. More unexpectedly, the layering of paint reveals a gap, a hiatus where the cave fell silent, followed by a renewed burst of imagery far more sophisticated than the earlier forms. It is a discontinuity without a clear trigger, and some paleoanthropologists quietly wonder whether a new population, arriving from an unknown origin, might have reawakened an artistic language that had nearly vanished. Yet no corresponding skeletal remains exist to confirm such an arrival, leaving only the art as a whisper of a presence that came and went without leaving a body behind. Across the Near East, similar patterns repeat. The earliest levels of Çatalhöyük show a density of population and a ritual complexity startling for a settlement without clear hierarchical leadership. The wall paintings display motifs, avian forms, celestial symbols, hybrid beings that reappear in later civilizations, but emerge here without precedent. The people of this settlement built with an understanding of communal layout, airflow, and ritual staging, as though imitating a blueprint inherited from somewhere beyond their geographic and cultural horizon. But there is no earlier site from which such knowledge could have diffused. The settlement rises out of nothing, complete in its iconography, as though its inhabitants were trying to reconstruct a memory of order that no longer fit the land around them. Within these abrupt appearances lies a quiet suggestion. Humanity's first organized societies may not have been inventions, but recollections. This possibility grows more tangible when one considers the global recurrence of flood legends. Dozens of cultures, separated by oceans and epochs, preserving variations of the same catastrophe. The Sumerian Eridu Genesis, the Hebrew account of Noah, the Hindu narrative of Manu, the Greek tale of Deucalion, even the stories preserved by indigenous groups in the Americas, all describe not only overwhelming water, but the destruction of a preceding world. Some versions speak of survival by guidance, others of punishment, others of a reset meant to erase forbidden knowledge. While myth alone cannot verify any lost civilization or otherworldly migration, the universality of these narratives is difficult to dismiss. They feel less like allegories and more like cultural scar tissue, memories transmuted into story after the factual substance had dissolved. Yet what unsettles more than the myths themselves is the consistency of what follows them. The sudden appearance of agriculture, astronomy, governance, and monumental architecture across multiple regions within a narrow window of time. It is as if, after the Great Rupture, scattered remnants of humanity began rebuilding from fragments of an older understanding. Not a full memory, but shards, techniques, symbols, intuitions that could not be entirely extinguished. These early leaps do not resemble the slow march of invention. They resemble recovery. And if recovery is the correct frame, then something far older than known history must have been lost. The question that hovers uncomfortably at the edge of these findings is not merely how such knowledge appeared, but why its earlier form left so little trace. Was the destruction natural? A planetary shift sweeping away every coastal settlement where early ingenuity might have flourished? Or was there a more deliberate force, human, cosmic, or otherwise, that sought to bury the memory of a beginning incompatible with the world that followed? And if the erasure were intentional, what truth could be so destabilizing that forgetting became humanity's first inheritance? Woven through the earliest strata of civilization is a perplexing tension between what humanity appears to have known and what the surrounding world suggests it should have been capable of. The ruins of the earliest ceremonial sites hint at coordinated labor, astronomical observation, and ritual sophistication that contradict the notion of small, scattered groups gradually testing the boundaries of community. At Göbekli Tepe, for instance, carved limestone pillars, some weighing more than 10 tons, stand arranged in circular enclosures whose alignments mirror celestial events. These structures predate agriculture, metallurgy, and pottery, yet they demonstrate symbolic and architectural mastery that should belong to a far later age. The site's builders left no trace of permanent dwellings, no early versions of the tools later civilizations used for construction. Instead, they seemed to work with a sureness that feels less like experimentation and more like revival, as if they were replicating a pattern half-remembered from a world no longer accessible to them. What deepens the mystery is the manner of the site's burial. The enclosures were deliberately filled with earth and debris, as though the builders themselves decided to conceal what they had created. Archaeologists debate why. Some argue it was ritual preservation, others that the site was abandoned under duress. But the intentionality is unmistakable. The world's first known temple was not destroyed by invaders or natural decay. It was buried by its makers, hidden away like a memory too heavy or too dangerous to keep in the open. Such an act invites a quiet, troubling question. What kind of knowledge would prompt a society to entomb its own origins? A different but equally unsettling pattern surfaces in the Andes. At the site of Corral, one of the oldest known urban centers in the Americas, pyramidal structures rise beside central plazas aligned to astronomical markers. Yet the city shows no evidence of warfare. No fortifications, no weapon caches, no signs of violent destruction. It is as if its inhabitants lived in a world guided by principles entirely unlike those governing later empires. Their music, preserved through bone flutes tuned to harmonic scales, suggests an acoustical understanding rare even in more advanced societies. Their irrigation systems reveal engineering coordination without any hint of centralized authority. These people were neither primitive nor experimental. They were confident, assured, almost as though they were reenacting knowledge from a source they themselves no longer fully grasped. And then, for reasons unknown, their city fell silent. No ruins of conquest explain its end. No layers of ash or drought-stricken soil reveal the catastrophe. Carroll simply faded away, leaving behind structures that feel like echoes, not inventions. Traces of similar echoes arise elsewhere. In Japan, the Jomon people produced pottery with intricate decorative patterns thousands of years before agricultural societies elsewhere mastered even basic firing techniques. The craftsmanship is so advanced that some researchers assert it must have emerged from an older tradition rather than spontaneous experimentation. Yet there is no evidence of such a predecessor. The Jomon appear out of the archaeological haze carrying a skill seemingly without lineage. Their burial customs, adorned with symbolic figurines and ritual objects, mirror motifs found in distant regions with no known contact. It is as if an aesthetic memory traveled with them, one carried across a threshold that no excavation has yet uncovered. These anomalies, subtle yet persistent, form a thread that pulls at the fabric of accepted history. They do not propose a single lost civilization nor confirm any extraordinary origin. Instead, they hint at something more elusive, a rupture, a moment, perhaps a series of moments, when humanity's cultural and cognitive continuity fractured, leaving later generations to rebuild from fragments they could no longer name. The speed with which early societies developed complex spiritual frameworks suggests they were attempting to articulate concepts inherited in pieces, like shards of a story once told in full. Myths of descent, celestial ancestors, guiding beings, and worlds before. This one may be less inventions of imagination than symbolic translations of a memory filtered through trauma, distance, or time. If such a rupture occurred, whether by natural cataclysm or a forced forgetting, it may explain why humanity's earliest achievements feel both startlingly advanced and strangely incomplete. The knowledge seems seasoned, yet the context behind it has vanished. It is as though humanity stepped onto Earth's stage mid-performance, carrying tools, symbols, and intuitions belonging to an act whose opening scenes have been erased. And if this erasure was not accidental, if it served a purpose we have yet to decipher, what does that say about the true beginning of the human story, the one concealed behind this veil of broken memory? Across the scattered remnants of ancient cultures, a faint but persistent resonance seems to bind together societies separated by oceans, mountains, and millennia. It is not a shared technology, nor a traceable migration pattern, but something more intangible, an echo carried within their cosmologies, rituals, and symbols. When examined closely, these echoes form peculiar alignments that traditional models of human development struggle to reconcile. They do not point to a single place or time, but to a pattern of remembering, as though early humanity were grasping for something once known but no longer within reach. Such patterns appear strikingly in the earliest sky lore. Long before telescopes, before metal instruments, before writing had solidified into durable record, cultures across the world mapped the heavens with astonishing precision. The Dogon of Mali described the invisible companion star of Sirius, something modern science confirmed only in the 20th century. Polynesian navigators plotted ocean routes using stellar grids so intricate that even contemporary navigators study their methods with awe. And in ancient Mesopotamia, priest astronomers tracked planetary cycles with mathematical sophistication that appears abruptly, with no simpler precursors in earlier layers. These achievements often emerge too suddenly, as if the stars themselves had once been more familiar, more intimate to those who first charted them. Ritual structures reinforce this strangeness. In Mesoamerica, pyramids aligned to solstices and Venus cycles rise from the jungle with geometric authority. In Ireland, the Chamber of Newgrange captures the winter solstice sunrise with such exactness that even minor deviations in construction would have ruined the effect. In South Asia, the ancient city of Mohenjo-Daro is laid out along cardinal directions with a precision rarely seen in early urban design. These alignments imply not merely observation, but intention, ritual, symbolic, perhaps even mnemonic. It is as though early builders encoded the sky into the earth, binding memory to stone in patterns intelligible only to those who once knew why the heavens mattered so profoundly. More enigmatic still is the recurrence of similar mythic structures in places far too distant for contact during early antiquity. Many cultures speak of a time before time, an era marked not by creation from nothing, but by transition from somewhere else. The Maya describe ancestors emerging from a distant realm of stars. Australian Aboriginal Dreamtime stories hint at ancestral beings descending to shape the land and teach early humans how to live. In the Tibetan Burn tradition, ancient teachers are said to have arrived across the sky on luminous chariots, a metaphor scholars attribute to spiritual vision, but which echoes stories told in Africa, the Near East, and the Pacific. None of these accounts require literal interpretation, but their shared implication, a descent, an arrival, a crossing, creates a quiet unease. Why would cultures that never met imagine beginnings that start with travel rather than genesis? Even the earliest human art seems to preserve fragments of memory that no longer align with lived experience. In cave systems from France to Indonesia, strange otherworldly figures appear. Elongated limbs, hybrid forms, radiant halos, geometric grids hovering around animals and humans alike. Some researchers interpret these as shamanic visions, others as symbolic representations of altered consciousness. Yet certain motifs, particularly the recurring lattice patterns and swirling vortexes, resemble the visual distortions reported by modern pilots at the edge of the atmosphere, or astronauts observing the Earth from low orbit. The resemblance may be coincidence, but it raises an unsettling possibility. Could these ancient artists have been expressing inherited imagery, visions once seen by ancestors not bound to the Earth as we understand it? Imagery carried across generations, long after the context of its origin had evaporated. As these mysteries accumulate, a shadow falls across the traditional timeline of human development. The smooth arc from simple bands of hunter-gatherers to settled agriculturalists to urban societies feels increasingly strained. Too many leaps appear without adequate build-up. Too many ideas seem to enter the world already matured. It is as if the early chapters of our story were written not here, but elsewhere, and what survives are only translations, partial, distorted, incomplete. The inconsistencies do not prove an extraterrestrial origin, nor do they confirm any singular lost civilization, but they leave behind a persistent question. Why does humanity's earliest knowledge feel so old, so seasoned, so strangely out of place for a species supposedly just beginning its ascent? If the first humans on Earth carried memories from beyond this world, whether literal, symbolic, or inherited through trauma, those memories may have fractured as they encountered a planet unfamiliar, unforgiving, and indifferent to their past. Perhaps this is why early myths are saturated with longing, exile, and loss. Perhaps this is why ancient rituals revolve around restoring balance, recovering fragments, returning to a state remembered but unreachable. And if such memories once guided our ancestors more clearly, what force, internal or external, caused them to dim? What boundary was crossed that made forgetting not only inevitable, but universal? There is a peculiar moment in the archaeological record when the Earth seems to shift from being merely inhabited to being interpreted. Landscapes that once served as hunting grounds and migration corridors suddenly become sacred geographies, mapped, measured, mythologized. This transformation appears in multiple regions with startling simultaneity, as if different peoples felt compelled to anchor themselves to the land in ways that imply not discovery, but compensation. The earliest ziggurats of Mesopotamia rise like artificial mountains in a landscape where no mountains stand. The people of ancient Peru shape entire valleys into geoglyphs, visible only from heights they should not have been able to access. Aboriginal songlines trace pathways across Australia with such accuracy that modern GPS surveys often confirm their directional fidelity. These practices seem less like the beginnings of human imagination and more like attempts to re-establish orientation, steps taken by a species that had lost a cosmic point of reference. Buried beneath these cultural expressions is a motif that rarely appears in textbooks but repeats with uncanny persistence: the notion of a time when humans could no longer reach the world they once knew. In early Egyptian cosmology, the field of reeds, a realm of origin, becomes separated from the living by a great barrier. In ancient Greece, Hesiod's golden age ends not in destruction but in distancing. Humans become remote from the gods, exiled from a state of closeness. Among the Navajo, the story of emergence describes a series of worlds ascended through, each abandoned as harmony deteriorated. These narratives differ in detail, but converge in sentiment. Something severed humanity from a former condition, leaving us to rebuild in a place that was never described as the first, only as the next. Hints of this rupture echo faintly in genetic studies. Certain analyses reveal bottlenecks in early human populations, dramatic reductions in numbers that suggest survival through cataclysmic events. But the subsequent expansions show a surprising degree of uniformity, as though groups emerging from isolation carried similar knowledge frameworks, similar mythic templates, similar intuitions. Scientists attribute this to shared ancestry, yet the distribution of these cultural elements often overlays migrations that, according to conventional models, should not have produced such cohesion. It is as if these early communities carried an inheritance older than their dispersal, something preserved not in genes, but in a type of memory transmitted through ritual, symbol, or perhaps through trauma so ancient that it predates the landscapes where they later settled. There are archaeological traces that deepen this discomfort. In the Levant, early Natufian settlements exhibit burial practices far more elaborate than expected for pre-agricultural societies. Bodies are arranged with deliberate orientation, adorned with beads, ochre, and carved stone objects that seem to symbolize more than simple reverence. Some burials include tools or ornaments made from materials sourced over long distances, suggesting that even in death, individuals were accompanied by tokens of a journey. Scholars interpret these as spiritual items or status symbols, but their recurrence hints at something else: the lingering belief that death was not an end, but a return. A return to where? The texts do not tell us. The stones do not translate their meaning. But the pattern endures long enough to imply that the idea of returning was older than the soil in which these bodies now rest. In East Africa, the region often described as the cradle of humanity, peculiarities arise as well. Certain early sites show tool traditions that vanish abruptly, replaced by more refined techniques with no transitional phases. At others, symbolic artifacts, engravings, beads, pigments, appear and disappear in ways that defy linear development. These fluctuations suggest cultural memory flickering in and out of clarity, as though groups periodically reconnected with inherited knowledge before losing it again. The rhythm resembles remembrance interrupted by forgetting, a push and pull of identity struggling to stabilize in a new world. Even environmental records seem complicit in this mystery. Tree ring studies, ice cores, and sediment samples reveal cycles of upheaval. Volcanic winters, rapid warming periods, meteorological anomalies that coincide with moments of cultural renewal or collapse. These disruptions may have pressured early societies to migrate, adapt, or reform their beliefs. But they also raise a subtler question. Were these shifts merely natural obstacles, or were they catalysts pushing humanity further from what it once remembered? After each upheaval, new myths arise, myths of exile, descent, or cosmic separation, suggesting that environmental trauma intertwined with a deeper existential dislocation. And while no single discovery overturns the established narrative of human origins, the collective weight of these anomalies suggests that the Earth may not have been the blank canvas we assume. Early humans behaved less like beings discovering a world for the first time and more like travelers adjusting to unfamiliar terrain, attempting to replicate a forgotten orientation toward the stars, toward the land, toward themselves. If these echoes truly stem from a past predating earthly memory, the question naturally sharpens. What was the nature of this earlier world? Was it a physical place, a cosmic domain, or a psychological state? And more troubling still, if humanity once possessed a clearer sense of where it came from, who or what ensured that such knowledge became so diffuse that only ritual, symbol, and longing remain? As the trajectory of early civilizations continues to unfold, a curious pattern becomes increasingly difficult to ignore. The earliest centers of knowledge behave as though they are responding to something absent, as if humanity were trying to reconstruct a foundation rather than invent one. This impression becomes especially vivid in the institutions that appear almost immediately alongside the first cities. Priesthoods, astronomical guilds, keepers of ritual calendars, and scribal castes who seem less like innovators and more like custodians. In Sumer, the priests of Eridu and Uruk carry titles that translate not to teacher or leader, but to restorer and rememberer, linguistic clues implying the preservation of something inherited rather than newly formed. The first astronomers do not present their knowledge as discovery. Their tablets read like the continuation of a tradition already ancient, as though the movement of the heavens were familiar, long before humanity built its first ziggurat. Such terminology is easily dismissed as poetic convention, yet its consistency across cultures suggests a subconscious acknowledgement of a past that could be transmitted but no longer fully explained. Similar guardianship appears in ancient Egypt, where the earliest priestly orders speak of their role not as interpreters of the divine, but as maintainers of Ma'at, a principle often translated as cosmic order. Yet the texts describe this order not as emerging from earth, but as pre-existing, something that must be kept intact lest the world fall out of alignment. In the pyramid texts, pharaohs return to the sky realm of the imperishables, a domain portrayed as their true home rather than a reward or paradise. These inscriptions feel strangely matter-of-fact, as though referencing a geography once as concrete as the Nile. Even the star shafts within the Great Pyramid direct the pharaoh's spirit toward specific constellations, not vaguely, but with pointed precision, aligning to the ancient horizon as if following an ancient map no longer found in any record. In the Indus Valley, another facet of this puzzle emerges. The uniformity of weights, measures, and urban layouts across vast distances implies centralized knowledge, yet there is no evidence of kings or ruling elites. This absence leads some researchers to suggest a decentralized but highly coordinated system, almost as if the society operated through inherited protocols rather than imposed authority. Their undeciphered script adds to the mystery. Dozens of symbols recurring in combinations too structured to be proto-writing, yet too concise to express extended narrative. Some scholars propose that this script may have functioned as a mnemonic device, a shorthand for concepts known widely enough not to require elaboration. If true, it would place the Indus system closer to a memory aid than an emergent form of communication. But a memory of what? Reflections of this enigmatic legacy appear in East Asia as well. Early Chinese myth speaks of sage kings who restored the order of heaven on earth, a phrasing that implies alignment with a pre-existing pattern. The Yellow Emperor, long treated as a semi-mythical figure, is credited with introducing medicine, metallurgy, astronomy, and governance, not through experimentation, but through recollection of a lost harmony. Even the earliest bronze artifacts of the Shang dynasty display casting techniques so advanced that metallurgists struggle to identify a developmental sequence. The process appears perfected from the outset, as if the knowledge arrived whole rather than constructed step by step. This sudden mastery sits uneasily within the linear model of technological evolution, prompting speculation that Bronze Age artisans were replicating methods inherited through ritual or tradition, methods whose origins lay in an era now irretrievable. Across the Pacific, the Polynesian voyagers embody yet another remnant of knowledge, seemingly too refined for its time. Their navigation techniques rely on star paths, wave patterns, wind memory, and an intuitive grasp of oceanic rhythms so complex that modern reconstructions often falter. These skills appear not as gradual achievements, but as an intact system carried across generations, preserved through chants, ceremonies, and the encoded wisdom of master navigators. When asked how such knowledge was first acquired, elders in some island traditions offer a simple, enigmatic answer. It was shown to us. They do not say by whom or what. The implication lingers that the knowledge belonged to an origin older than their islands, older than their migration, older perhaps than their world. Even the earliest Indo-European traditions preserve fragments of a story that feels strangely displaced. In the Rig Veda, one of humanity's oldest surviving texts, hymns describe luminous beings guiding humanity after a great upheaval. In the Avesta of ancient Persia, the first humans are said to survive a cosmic winter by retreating into an underground refuge constructed according to instructions from a celestial teacher. Scholars interpret these as allegories for climate change or early migrations, yet the motifs of guidance, descent, and remembrance repeat too consistently to be dismissed. They point to a deep cultural wound, an attempt to preserve fragments of a knowledge broken by forces no longer remembered. As these threads weave together, they form a tapestry suggesting that early humans, across continents and climates, believed themselves to be rebuilding rather than beginning. Their institutions, myths, and technologies behave like remnants of a blueprint carried from somewhere else, fragmented by time, but never fully erased. They hint at a collective memory that trembles beneath the surface of recorded history, surfacing in symbols, rituals, and structures whose purposes we can describe but not comprehend. Yet the central question persists, unresolved and quietly insistent. If these early societies were reconstructing something older, where did the original form reside? Was it a civilization now lost beneath oceans or ice? A world reshaped by catastrophes we no longer recall? Or was it something further still? An origin beyond Earth itself, hinted at through echoes humanity has been trying to decipher ever since its first cities rose from the dust. As the earliest civilizations grow more defined in the archaeological record, a quieter, more elusive pattern begins to emerge. One that does not announce itself through monuments or cities, but through the peculiar ways knowledge is transmitted, concealed, or altered. In many traditions, wisdom appears not as a shared human endeavor, but as something held by a small group, compartmentalized and guarded with a gravity suggesting that its origin was never meant for common use. The first scribes, astronomers, healers, and ritual specialists behave less like pioneers carving new paths and more like mediators between two worlds, the world they inhabited and another whose memory flickered like a distant star. This guardedness becomes especially pronounced when examining the earliest coded texts. In Mesopotamia, cuneiform tablets describing the movements of Venus or the omens of eclipses deviate from straightforward record-keeping. They embed layers of symbolic instruction, as though the astronomers were protecting the interpretive key. In Egypt, funerary texts evolve into carefully structured sequences of metaphors that only initiates could decode. And in the Maya world, astronomical codices privilege cyclical patterns that imply knowledge of celestial rhythms predating the civilization itself. Such secrecy is often attributed to political power or priestly authority. Yet the tone within these texts, reverent, cautious, almost mournful, suggests a subtler burden, safeguarding fragments of a truth no longer fully understood. Hints of this burden appear in the physical tools of knowledge as well. The earliest calendars, from Stonehenge to Nabta Playa to the megalithic rings of Brittany, are not simple agricultural instruments. Their structure reveals an obsession with celestial cycles stretching far beyond the needs of early subsistence. Some alignments track lunar nodes, eclipse seasons, or rare planetary conjunctions, phenomena whose full cycles unfold over decades or centuries. Why would early peoples invest such monumental effort into observing patterns that would bear fruit only for generations they would never meet? Perhaps they were not discovering these cycles but preserving them, attempting to maintain continuity with a cosmology inherited rather than invented. Many megalithic sites appear to function like repositories of memory, their alignments serving as mnemonic anchors ensuring that the sky itself would keep telling a story long after the tale's beginning was forgotten. Yet the most haunting echoes of an older, obscured knowledge arise not from astronomy, but from practices concerned with the human body and spirit. In the oldest burial traditions, from the Natufians of the Levant to the early Jomon of Japan, bodies are interred with ochre, shells, beads, or carved tokens whose symbolism predates recognizable religion. These objects seem to mark a transition, a passage not into an imagined afterlife, but into a realm treated with familiarity, as though the dead were returning to a place their community once knew. The uniformity of certain symbols, spirals, concentric circles, and paired figures suggests that early humans shared a concept of the self that did not originate from the landscapes where they were buried. Later funerary architecture amplifies this impression. Dolmens across Europe, echo-chambered tombs in Korea, and megalithic passages in India, all emphasizing orientation, light, and directionality, as if the meaning of death lay not in the ground, but in a journey along coordinates no longer visible to the living. Still, for all these echoes, one detail remains strangely consistent. The earliest guardians of knowledge often imply that their teachings are fragments. In Sumer, scribal apprentices learn through lists, lexical compilations that read more like catalogues of categories than explanations. In Egypt, priestly initiates memorize long sequences of metaphor without receiving their literal context. In India, the Vedic tradition relies on oral recitation spanning centuries, preserving sound patterns whose original meaning may have been lost long before they were written down. And in the Americas, quipu chords preserve numerical sequences whose interpretive keys may have vanished with earlier cultural memories. In every case, the structure implies inheritance. The content may shift, decay, or fragment, but the pattern remains. It is as if humanity clung to the skeleton of an idea long after its living form had dissipated. What unsettles scholars most is how these patterns intersect with sudden disappearances. Entire knowledge systems vanish from the record with disconcerting abruptness. The linear A script of Minoan Crete dissolves into silence after centuries of use, leaving no clear successor. The Indus script disappears alongside the society that once maintained it. The Rongorongo tablets of Easter Island preserve glyphs whose meaning escaped even those living at the time of European contact. These vanishings resemble not natural decline, but rupture, moments when understanding collapses faster than cultural transmission can compensate. And each disappearance, in its own way, feels like another layer of an older memory falling away, another door closing behind a species that dimly senses it has already lost too much. As these silences accumulate, a question begins to pulse beneath the archaeological record. Were these knowledge systems simply unstable, or were they the frayed remnants of something older, something humanity was never able to fully translate into the conditions of Earth? If so, the guardians of early civilizations may not have been protecting secrets for power, but desperately preserving the final threads of a story whose beginning had already slipped beyond reach. And if these are only the fragments that survived, what might the full tapestry have revealed about where we came from, and why our earliest memories seem shrouded in a forgetting that no culture has ever managed to escape? The closer one examines the rise and fall of humanity's earliest knowledge systems, the more a troubling rhythm begins to surface. A rhythm defined not by continuity, but by interruption. Civilizations flourish with startling sophistication only to retreat suddenly into silence, leaving behind remnants that feel like the residue of a much older inheritance slipping further from reach. This pattern becomes starkly visible when one considers the mysterious disappearances of entire cultures whose advancements seem disproportionate to their archaeological precedents. The people of the Indus Valley crafted cities with precise drainage systems, standardized measurements, and expansive trade networks. Yet their civilization dissolves without fire, invasion, or famine etched into the soil. The Minoans built palaces whose engineering suggests an intuitive understanding of airflow and seismic pressures. But their script, linear, vanishes before its meaning can be passed on. The Olmec civilization of Mesoamerica emerges with advanced iconography and monumental stone heads carved from materials transported over vast distances, then fades, leaving only faint echoes in the cultures that follow. Such disappearances do not resemble societies evolving or declining organically. They resemble systems losing access to a deeper source of knowledge they could no longer sustain. This erosion becomes even more pronounced when viewed through the lens of technological regression. After the end of the Bronze Age in the Eastern Mediterranean, entire regions lose the ability to produce writing for centuries. The collapse is so profound that historians still debate whether it was caused by environmental catastrophe, population movement, or internal conflict. Yet none of these explanations fully account for the severity of the intellectual amnesia that followed. Trade networks vanish, architectural techniques simplify, astronomical records dwindle, and cultural memory contracts as though humanity were suddenly unable to maintain the cognitive or social frameworks once inherited. It is a pattern hauntingly similar to what occurs when a species is severed from practices it did not originate. Skills preserved by repetition rather than comprehension, lost when any link in the chain fractures. Even the continuity of myth reflects this unraveling. Themes of descent from the sky, of beings teaching humans the order of the world, of knowledge bestowed and later withdrawn, become less detailed over time. Early Sumerian myths describe elaborate genealogies of beings who shaped humanity's fate. Egyptian texts speak of a first time, a golden age when cosmic principles were known directly. Mesoamerican traditions recount precise celestial cycles delivered by divine instructors. But as centuries pass, these stories fragment, compress, or fade into metaphor. Later retellings preserve only shadows, symbols without explanations, rituals without origin stories. It is as if the further humanity moves from its earliest eras, the more its mythic memory decays, mirroring the erosion found in its technologies and institutions. Even linguistics offers its own trace of this fading. Proto-languages reconstructed by scholars often reveal structures far more complex than their later descendants. A paradox in evolutionary terms, as language typically grows in complexity with cultural elaboration. Some ancient tongues display grammatical forms with layers of nuance that seem unnecessary for early societies, but reminiscent of systems built for a worldview concerned with precision, orientation, and cosmic alignment. When these languages simplify, they do so abruptly, as though the conceptual framework that required such complexity had been forgotten. To some researchers, this suggests not primitive origins, but the debris of an older, more intricate linguistic tradition collapsing under the weight of time. Yet perhaps the most haunting evidence of interruption lies in the geographic distribution of early settlements. Many of the world's first known population centers, Göbekli Tepe, Jericho, Catalhoyuk, Miagar, appear not along coastlines, where early humans should naturally have congregated, but inland on elevated ground. This is perplexing because coastlines offer abundant resources and are the logical places for early sedentary life to begin. But rising sea levels following the last glacial period would have submerged any earlier coastal settlements, if they existed. The absence of these drowned cities in the archaeological record feels less like proof of their non-existence and more like a consequence of preservation limits. The sea conceals what the land cannot show. And if humanity began, or restarted, along ancient shorelines now buried under hundreds of meters of water, then the true early chapters of human history may remain permanently inaccessible, overwritten by geologic processes that erase both evidence and origin. Taken together, these ruptures form a picture that is not linear, but cyclical. Episodes of knowledge rising sharply, then collapsing into obscurity. It resembles a species attempting to preserve memories that do not belong to the environment it inhabits. Memories too fragile to withstand the upheavals of a planet still calming from its own violent past. The question grows heavier with each anomaly. Were these early civilizations reaching upward toward understanding, or downward into the sediment of something they once knew instinctively? And if humanity truly carried the remnants of a non-terrestrial origin, perhaps these collapses mark not failures of innovation, but the slow, inevitable fading of an inheritance that Earth itself could not sustain. What remains unclear is whether this forgetting was a natural consequence of time or the result of an unseen hand guiding how much humanity was permitted to remember. If certain knowledge was withdrawn, whether by trauma, catastrophe, or design, what boundary was crossed that made such erasure necessary? And more unsettling still, if our beginnings did not unfold on this world, does the silence in our oldest strata signal distance or abandonment? The further the narrative of early humanity drifts from its known shoreline, the more it begins to resemble not an origin story but a recovery, an effort to bridge an unspoken divide between the world humans found themselves inhabiting and a world they somehow remembered without remembering. This tension becomes even more pronounced in the traditions that revolve around sound, vibration, and resonance. Long before writing, long before architectural triumphs, the earliest expressions of human culture take the form of chant, rhythm, and tonal sequences. It is in these seemingly simple practices that something unexpectedly sophisticated emerges. Ethnomusicologists studying ancient ritual music in places as distant as Papua New Guinea, northern Scandinavia, and the Rift Valley note recurring tonal intervals and rhythmic patterns that correlate with mathematical ratios later formalized in Greek harmonics and Indian classical systems. These recurrences appear in cultures with no historical connection, as though sound, more than speech, more than carving, preserved a structural memory that language had already begun to lose. Such patterns raise an odd question. Were early humans reconstructing something they had once known instinctively? A sonic framework shaped not by Earth's environment, but by a different one entirely. Archaeology adds substance to this question in places where architecture and acoustics converge. The hypogeum of Halsaflieni in Malta, carved more than 5,000 years ago, contains a chamber tuned to a resonant frequency of roughly 110 Hz. Modern researchers find that this frequency induces altered states of awareness and enhanced visual imagery, a phenomenon documented also in certain Tibetan ritual spaces and Andean ceremonial structures. It is difficult to imagine isolated Neolithic builders arriving at this effect through trial and error. The precision suggests intentionality, and intentionality implies memory, a recollection of how sound might once have been used to orient the mind, perhaps even to access layers of awareness that early humans believed were closer to their true origin. Whether this memory was spiritual, symbolic, or inherited from a time before Earth remains unanswerable, yet the resonance of these ancient chambers whispers of a technology, not of materials, but of perception. Other remnants of such perceptual technologies appear in the alignment of early monuments to infrasound-generating landscapes, canyons, wind corridors, and geological formations that produce low-frequency vibrations bordering human sensory limits. The builders of the Nazca lines chose plateaus where the ground hums with faint seismic tones. The stone circles of Scotland frequently sit atop ridges where ocean winds generate standing waves. Even the pyramids of Egypt have internal spaces whose narrow passages amplify specific frequencies. These structures may have functioned as instruments rather than idols, tools for recreating states of consciousness that humanity once accessed more naturally. If so, they are not examples of progress but of adaptation, efforts to restore a faculty that had begun to fade. Humanity might not have been learning to perceive, perhaps it was learning to remember. This possibility aligned strangely with certain strands of ancient myth that speak of beings who communicated not through speech, but through something akin to vibration or radiance. The earliest layers of the Upanishads describe primordial sound as the origin of all form, while Aboriginal traditions speak of ancestral beings singing the world into existence. Greek Orphic hymns refer to cosmic harmony as the structuring force behind all life. Skeptics view these as metaphors, yet their shared reliance on resonance, not light, not language, suggests that early humans may have held an intuitive belief that the universe itself once communicated through vibration. If this belief reflects an inherited memory from an environment beyond Earth, it may explain why sound served as the earliest and most persistent ritual tool. Genetic evidence adds another dimension. Studies of neuroacoustic responses suggest that humans possess unusually high sensitivity to certain frequencies compared to other primates. This heightened sensitivity does not provide clear evolutionary advantage in the environments where early humans lived. It is a trait that seems biologically expensive for little terrestrial benefit. Its persistence implies that at some point in the deep past, this sensitivity served an essential function, perhaps one connected to the environments where the earliest ancestors of humanity developed, or to the forms of communication they once relied upon. The trait remains, but its purpose has become obscured, like a key without a lock. And yet, as with all early knowledge, the record shows a gradual dimming. Ritual acoustics fade into symbolic drumming. Harmonic structures devolve into local musical variations. The architectural precision that once shaped resonant temples shifts into aesthetic ornamentation. The idea that sound could bridge worlds becomes myth rather than practice. The memory does not vanish at once. It fractures, refracts, dissolves into metaphor. Humanity continues to sing, to chant, to build spaces of echo, but the reason for doing so, whatever ancient purpose it once served, grows indistinct. Perhaps this transformation reflects nothing more than cultural drift. Or perhaps it reflects a deeper forgetting, the fading of a capability that no longer aligns with the physics of the world humanity came to inhabit. And this leads to a question that lingers uncomfortably in the dim corridors of these ancient structures, vibrating beneath the threshold of audibility. If early humans preserved the remnants of a perceptual technology not suited to Earth, what does that imply about the environment where that technology first evolved? And more haunting still, what else might humanity have once perceived that the Earth, in its density and silence, gradually taught us to forget? As the inquiry moves into the realm of symbols, those quiet survivors of forgotten ages, a different strand of humanity's fractured memory begins to reveal itself. Symbols endure where languages fail, where cities collapse, where rituals devolve into echoes. They persist across continents without ever meeting, carrying strange geometries and recurring motifs that seem disproportionate to the intellectual state of the societies that used them. Spirals emerge on the stones of Newgrange, on petroglyphs in the American Southwest, on pottery in ancient Japan, and on burial slabs in the Sahara, repeating with a stubborn clarity that has little to do with aesthetics and far more to do with orientation. Two parallel lines linked by a third appear in early Sumerian iconography, in Andean textiles, and in the geometric engravings of Paleolithic Africa. The so-called world tree, a vertical axis linking realms above and below, rises not only in Norse myth, but in the Maya Waka Chan, the Siberian axis mundi, and the Indus Valley's horned deity seals. These images feel less like inventions of isolated cultures and more like fragments of a conceptual framework older than Earth's landscapes, carried by memory long after its meaning had fractured into metaphor. Archaeologists often interpret these symbols as expressions of universal human psychology. But the repetition extends beyond what coincidence can comfortably hold. Certain geometric motifs correspond to mathematical constants or cosmological models unknown to the societies that carved them. The flower of life pattern, for example, appears in Egyptian temples, Chinese bronze work, and prehistoric glyphs in Turkey. Phases of a geometry that encodes ratios central to physics and biological form. Yet these cultures had no demonstrable contact, nor any known mathematical tradition capable of deriving these principles from first principles. One possibility is that these motifs emerged through unconscious pattern recognition. But another possibility, more subtle and unsettling, is that early humans preserved symbolic remnants of an intellectual vocabulary inherited from a forgotten source, an inheritance they could transmit but no longer interpret. This inheritance becomes more pronounced when examining early cosmograms, diagrammatic attempts to map the structure of the universe. The Sumerian depiction of 3 cosmic layers mirrors the cosmology of the ancient Maya and the tiered heavens described in Vedic literature. Chinese cosmology speaks of a dome above and a realm below, separated by a middle world shaped by pillars of balance. These frameworks are separated by oceans, mountains, and tens of thousands of years. Yet they describe the universe with a structural symmetry that transcends geography. They act like memory maps, reconstructions of an order glimpsed rather than invented. Could these early cosmograms be attempts to chart a cosmos that humanity once experienced directly, perhaps in an origin environment far different from Earth? If so, the symbols preserved not the physics of this world, but the memory of a prior one. The symbolism of transformation offers another thread. Serpents shedding skin, birds ascending, anthropomorphic beings with wings, hybrid creatures merging human and animal forms. These figures populate early cave art and ceremonial objects with a frequency that suggests an obsession not with animals, but with states of being. In shamanic traditions from Siberia to the Amazon, transformation symbolizes a journey between worlds, a remembrance of crossing from one state to another. Scholars argue these represent altered consciousness, but why did altered consciousness become the primary gateway for accessing origins across so many unrelated cultures? Why did so many traditions describe their ancestors as beings of light, motion, or transition? The symbolism feels uncomfortably consistent with a species recalling a migration across immense boundaries, disguising the memory as myth when language faltered. Even more telling are the symbols that disappear abruptly. The enigmatic script of the Indus Valley fades without influence on later writing systems. The linear A glyphs vanish before they can evolve naturally. The Rongorongo script of Easter Island, the only known written language of Polynesia, evaporates before any European could learn it. In each case, the final bearers of the script seem to have inherited something they could not fully comprehend, a symbolic vocabulary belonging to a worldview that no longer existed. Their loss does not resemble cultural change. It resembles memory collapsing in on itself, as if a conceptual world once shared by humanity had finally slipped beyond reach. This global pattern of fragmentation casts a new shadow over another enduring mystery: the extraordinary speed with which symbolic capacity emerged in Homo sapiens. Geneticists have long puzzled over how the neurological architecture for abstract reasoning, metaphor, and long-range planning appeared in such a brief evolutionary window. The so-called cognitive revolution is often presented as an internal leap, but its suddenness remains unexplained. If humanity's capacity for symbolic thought originated elsewhere or under conditions not found on Earth, then symbols may represent the final surviving traces of a cognitive environment humanity once navigated naturally. A landscape now accessible only through art, ritual, and dream. Symbols would become not records, but fossils, imprints of a vanished mode of perception. This interpretation raises a final, unsettling question. If symbols are the remnants of a memory older than Earth, then what does their fading tell us? Are they the last shadows of an inheritance dissolving over time? Or are they clues we were meant to recover, fragments designed to outlast catastrophe, migration, or deliberate erasure? And if they were meant to guide us back to something long forgotten, who or what first inscribed them into the human mind? As the investigation drifts further from tangible ruins and deeper into the architecture of human consciousness, another layer of the mystery begins to take shape. One hidden not in monuments or artifacts, but in the internal structures that govern perception, memory, and awareness itself. Modern neuroscience has long puzzled over features of the human mind that appear excessive for the survival needs of early hunter-gatherers. The capacity for recursive imagination, the ability to construct complex hypothetical worlds, the drive to seek meaning beyond immediate experience. These traits arise abruptly in the evolutionary timeline, yet they do not correlate cleanly with the environmental pressures of Pleistocene Earth. Other species Even those facing harsher conditions developed specialized cognition tuned precisely to their habitats. Humans, by contrast, developed minds oriented toward abstraction, cosmology, and introspective depth, capacities that seem strangely mismatched to the terrestrial environments in which they emerged. It is almost as if human consciousness was shaped for a context that no longer exists, as if it were a tool designed for another landscape and now forced to adapt to Earth's constraints. Certain psychological patterns offer quiet evidence of this displacement. For example, the phenomenon of visuospatial bias, the human tendency to navigate mentally through imagined three-dimensional spaces, has no clear evolutionary advantage in the grasslands or forests of early Earth. Yet it aligns oddly well with the requirements of navigating star fields or vast, empty horizons where landmarks are sparse and orientation must rely on internalized mapping. Similarly, the human brain's affinity for rhythmic cycles mirrors astronomical periodicities more than terrestrial ones. Our circadian rhythms align with the 24-hour cycle, yet the brain also responds to patterns approximating lunar phases and multi-day oscillations without any obvious adaptive necessity. These traits do not prove anything, but they hint at a cognitive architecture tuned to cycles broader and more regular than those dominating Earth's environment. Such remnants could be interpreted as evolutionary accidents, or as faint vestiges of an older synchronization, carried into a world that does not require it. Even more enigmatic is humanity's persistent longing for transcendence, a need to reach beyond the physical, the ordinary, the here. Anthropologists often frame this urge as a byproduct of self-awareness, yet its universality suggests something deeper. Whether in vision quests of Native American tribes, the meditative disciplines of India, the trance rituals of African lineages, or the ecstatic rites of ancient Greece, humans continually seek altered states of consciousness, as though trying to regain access to a lost dimension of experience. These practices resemble attempts to restore a connection severed long ago, to access a frequency of perception no longer naturally available. Many traditions describe these states not as discovery, but as return. The Polynesian concept of Hokulea, the star of guidance, is said to awaken ancestral memory. The Vedic tradition speaks of remembrance and martis as the means by which beings reconnect with their true origin. Even in Plato's philosophy, knowledge is described not as learning, but as recollection. These echoes may reflect more than metaphor. They may reveal a species attempting to recover a mode of consciousness that once came effortlessly. Genetic studies add another thread to this tapestry of dislocation. A handful of genes associated with neurodevelopment, most notably HAR1, FOXP2, and certain regulatory elements involved in cortical expansion, evolved at rates far faster than expected in the lineage leading to Homo sapiens. The rapid refinement of these genes remains a scientific puzzle. Some researchers propose that periods of extreme environmental stress accelerated mutation rates. Others suggest that cultural innovation pressured neurological development. Yet neither explanation fully accounts for the precision of the changes or their timing. It is almost as if the human brain underwent a guided restructuring, reshaping itself not for the conditions of prehistoric Earth, but for capacities whose purpose lies outside the fossil record. Such speculation remains far from scientific consensus, yet the anomalies sit in the data like quiet fingerprints. Whether they point to environmental influence, unknown interactions, or something more profound is a question left unresolved. Another dimension of the mystery emerges through humanity's fractured relationship with memory. Unlike many animals, humans frequently retain impressions, phobias, and instinctual tendencies that appear disconnected from lived experience. The fear of falling from great heights is near universal, despite most ancestral humans living in open plains rather than perilous cliffs. So too is the inexplicable comfort many feel under star-filled skies, the sense of orientation restored not by landmarks, but by constellations. These impulses may be evolutionary residues, or they may reflect deeper patterns of familiarity carried across epochs. In countless myths, humanity's ancestors look upward, not with curiosity, but with recognition. Sky realms are described not as distant or unreachable, but as homes once occupied. If these stories emerged from inherited psychological imprints rather than literal history, they still reveal a species haunted by displacement, searching for a lost anchoring point in the cosmos. At the intersection of neuroscience, psychology, and myth lies a subtle implication. Humanity may be a species living with an instinct it can no longer name. A sense of having come from elsewhere, a sense that something essential lies beyond present perception, a sense of homesickness no geography can satisfy. Whether this is the residue of evolutionary memory or the echo of a migration older than Earth's story is impossible to say. But the unease remains, flowing through dreams, rituals, and philosophies across cultures and eras. And as these threads converge, a deeper question begins to take shape. One that has lingered unspoken beneath every anomaly, every myth, every leap and collapse in early history. Is humanity's consciousness itself the most compelling evidence that our origins may not lie entirely on this world? And if the mind carries the faint imprint of another beginning, what else might it remember if the barriers of forgetting were somehow lifted? As one moves further from the physical traces of early humanity and into the philosophical frameworks that shaped the world's first civilizations, a quieter but more profound enigma emerges. The overwhelming insistence across cultures that reality as humans experience it is incomplete. Nearly every ancient tradition contains the assertion that the visible world is only a fragment of a larger structure, and that humanity once existed in greater proximity to that fuller reality before a separation occurred. This is not the language of invention, it is the language of loss. The earliest Egyptian texts speak of a primordial order disrupted, a veil drawn between humans and the realm from which kingship once descended. In the Orphic tradition of Greece, the soul is described as a prisoner cast down into the physical world, condemned to wander in forgetfulness. The Vedic scriptures portray existence as a cycle of veils, each concealing a deeper truth. Even indigenous peoples of the Americas describe the world as a broken remnant of a unity once intact. The universality of this sentiment raises a question modern anthropology rarely entertains. Why would the earliest cultures imagine themselves separated from something, unless the notion of separation resonated with an unexplained fracture in their collective memory? Philosophers across ages have attempted to articulate this sense of estrangement. Plato wrote of ideal forms, perfect archetypes to which earthly objects are but shadows. Gnostic traditions framed the physical world as a diminished echo of a higher order, dimmed either by accident or design. Taoist writings describe humans as beings who once flowed with the cosmic current before losing alignment. These systems arise independently, across continents and centuries, yet all converge on the same motif. Humanity is living in a reduced state, one that obscures its true origin. Modern scholarship interprets this as metaphor for existential anxiety or the universal human search for meaning. But perhaps these philosophical traditions instead preserve the faint outline of a knowledge older than civilization, a recognition that human consciousness carries an irreconcilable mismatch between what it is and the environment it occupies, as though built for a different plane of experience entirely. This dissonance becomes more pronounced when examining humanity's preoccupation with boundaries, those between life and death, waking and dreaming, earth and sky, matter and spirit. Early ritual practices often revolve around crossing these thresholds, not in pursuit of novelty, but as if reenacting an ancient transition. The shaman enters trance to recover a lost passage. The priest ascends the temple steps to replicate a cosmic journey. The mystic withdraws into silence to bridge the gap between the human and the absolute. Across cultures, these practices are framed as recoveries, not discoveries. The language is consistent. Remember, return, open the way. This linguistic repetition suggests that early societies sensed an obstruction, a barrier imposed after a rupture so deep that only ritual could gesture toward what once was effortless. Whether this rupture was psychological, cosmological, or historical remains unresolved, yet its emotional contour, homesickness for an unnameable elsewhere, persists like a pulse beneath human culture. Even the earliest legal and moral codes reflect this memory of a lost order. The Sumerian concept of me, Egyptian Ma'at, the Vedic RTA, the Chinese Tianming, all describe an ethical alignment with a cosmic pattern predating human society. These are not simple rules for social cohesion. They are claims that human conduct must harmonize with an order that existed before humanity arrived. Why would such an idea be so widespread unless early humans perceived themselves as inheritors of a framework they did not originate? The insistence that morality is not invented but restored hints at a deeper intuition. That humanity, at its beginning, remembered something foundational, something that has since faded into mythic language. The most haunting evidence of this fading lies in the transition from oral to written culture. As writing becomes dominant, mythic narratives begin to harden into fixed forms, losing the tonal fluidity that oral traditions preserved. It is in this shift that something essential appears to slip beyond reach. Earlier stories speak with immediacy, as if recounting events known to ancestors firsthand. Later versions become symbolic, distant, interpreted rather than lived. The transition resembles not the evolution of knowledge, but the dimming of direct memory. A people who once spoke of origins with confidence now resort to allegory, as though the substance of the story had dissolved, but its outline refused to disappear entirely. If humanity's early myths once encoded real experiences, whether cosmic, migratory, or psychological, the movement toward abstraction may reflect the final stage of forgetting, when only philosophical systems remained to articulate a memory too fragmented to recount plainly. Throughout this erosion, a persistent idea survives, that human existence is defined by exile. not exile from a garden, a paradise, or a golden age alone, but from a state of being in which humans were aligned with something far greater than themselves. If this idea arose independently across the globe, is it merely an expression of universal longing? Or could it be the residue of an actual transition, one when humanity entered a world in which its deepest cognitive structures were mismatched to their new environment? And so another question surfaces, more fragile yet more provocative than the rest. If humanity is a species living in a state of exile, then what was the nature of the home we lost? And why does every civilization hint that the forgetting of it was not accidental, but imposed? As the threads of archaeology, myth, cognition, and philosophy converge, they begin to form a shape. Not a final answer, but a silhouette of a human story defined less by origins than by severance. It becomes increasingly difficult to ignore the possibility that humanity's earliest struggle was not to rise from ignorance, but to endure the shock of displacement. This sensation grows sharper when examining the earliest attempts to codify history itself. The chronicles of the ancient world do not present linear accounts stretching into deep antiquity. Instead, they begin abruptly, often accompanied by explicit acknowledgments that the true beginning lies beyond reach. Sumerian king lists describe reigns extending thousands of years before the flood, only to reset afterward, as if a boundary had been crossed. Egyptian annals reference dynasties of beings who ruled before humans, not mythic gods in the later sense, but figures whose existence was described with the tone of remembered lineage. Even in China's bamboo annals, the earliest entries portray an age of luminous rulers whose deeds become increasingly fragmented the further back the text reaches, as though scribes were copying from a record they themselves barely understood. These documents do not read like inventions. They read like the residue of a memory that resisted integration into the new world humanity found itself confined to. Scientific inquiry, too, carries its own quiet discomfort. Genetics reveals that all humans today descend from a surprisingly small ancestral population, far smaller than expected for a species meant to have diversified gradually across a continent. This bottleneck suggests survival through a catastrophe, yet the speed of subsequent cultural development remains disproportionate to standard models. Meanwhile, the fossil record preserves a perplexing lack of clear transitional material for the neurological traits that distinguish Homo sapiens. Instead of a gradual arc, there is a compressed leap, a sudden flowering of cognition whose origins remain unexplained. Some researchers have proposed environmental triggers, others invoke cultural feedback loops. But beneath these theories lies a possibility rarely articulated, that human consciousness may have emerged not solely from Earth's environmental pressures, but from conditions no longer present, leaving us with a cognitive apparatus optimized for a world that no longer exists. This mismatch becomes more apparent when considering humanity's restless capacity for projection. Despite living on a planet filled with complexity, humans repeatedly direct their gaze upward. The oldest observatories track the heavens long before agriculture stabilized. The earliest myths revolve around star realms, not earthly landscapes. Navigation, timekeeping, ritual, and identity become anchored to celestial cycles. Even today, humans speak instinctively of destiny, purpose, ascension. concepts that revolve around movement away from their native ground. This celestial orientation might be symbolic, yet its emotional weight suggests something deeper, a longing not for exploration, but for return. It is as if the human psyche carries a directional imprint, a compass needle still trembling toward a point that no longer exists within physical reach. The implications ripple through humanity's technological history as well. Many innovations appear as though rediscovered rather than invented. Mathematical constants, harmonic ratios, architectural proportions, and cosmological patterns arise in forms too consistent across isolated cultures to be explained solely by parallel development. When such knowledge re-emerges, it often does so through individuals who describe their insights not as creations, but as recollections. Pythagoras spoke of numbers as eternal truths remembered by the soul. Ancient Indian sages framed revelation as the uncovering of knowledge always present. Indigenous shamans report visions that feel ancestral rather than hallucinatory. Again and again, humanity frames discovery as retrieval, as if knowledge were something buried within, waiting to be unlocked. This pattern might reflect the metaphysics of introspection, or it could gesture to an inheritance humanity once carried consciously, now preserved only in the deepest layers of mind. Yet perhaps the clearest sign that humanity's story contains a fracture lies in its fear of its own potential. Civilizations repeatedly warn of boundaries that must not be crossed, knowledge forbidden, tools too powerful, realms too distant. The myth of Prometheus, punished for bringing fire, the biblical story of Babel, where unity and ambition provoke divine intervention, the Hindu cycle of yugas, in which humanity's decline begins when it reaches beyond its station, the countless taboos surrounding esoteric knowledge in Egypt, China, Mesoamerica, all carry the same undertone, that humans once violated a limit and that the consequence was separation. These warnings might reflect political control, but their emotional resonance feels older, as though they preserve a collective memory of an infraction that marked the beginning of our exile. If this infraction occurred before humanity's arrival on Earth, or during a migration lost to time, its imprint would endure not in fact, but in fear, carried through myth as a caution against awakening something long suppressed. And so, standing before this tapestry of partial truths and fractured memories, one is left with a question that has hovered over the narrative from the beginning. If human history did not begin on Earth, what force or event required that humanity forget where it truly came from? Was the forgetting a mercy, a safeguard, a punishment, or simply the inevitable cost of crossing between worlds? And if the veil were to thin, if some future discovery or transformation were to bring the lost memory back, would humanity recognize the truth? Or would it recoil from a revelation too vast to bear? If the journey traced through these shadows has revealed anything, it is the quiet fragility of the story we call human history. What endures in stone, in song, in symbol, and in the architecture of the mind itself hints at a beginning that refuses to stay confined within the boundaries of a single planet. And yet, the further one follows these echoes, across ruins, across myths, across the circuitry of consciousness, the more the narrative resembles a tapestry woven from both memory and forgetting. Something in our earliest past was interrupted. Something was carried. Something was lost. And whatever truth lies behind that fracture continues to shape the questions humanity asks each time we lift our eyes to the stars. Perhaps the purpose of exploring these mysteries is not to arrive at answers, but to restore the permission to wonder, to acknowledge that history, as we inherit it, is not a closed book, but a doorway, and that beyond it, other chapters may wait. Chapters written in the language of civilizations erased by water, by fire, by time, or by forces that never intended to leave their signatures in clay. Each anomaly, each myth, each impossible achievement becomes not evidence of a single alternate origin, but an invitation to expand the boundaries of what we consider possible. For in the spaces where certainty recedes, imagination becomes a form of remembrance, and remembrance is the first step toward awakening what humanity may have forgotten. Thank you for drifting through these questions with me, for letting your thoughts wander into the ancient quiet where the known world begins to blur at its edges. If these reflections stirred something, curiosity, unease, or the faint sensation of remembering a story you have never been told, then the journey has already begun. Welcome to the Cryptic Realm channel, where each night opens another corridor into the mysteries that linger beneath our history. If you wish to continue exploring these hidden narratives, consider staying with us, subscribing, listening, and returning whenever the world feels a little too certain. For there are still countless riddles waiting in the dark, and together we will keep tracing the fragile threads that lead back to the place where humanity's forgotten origin still whispers.